Chapter 2 The First Adventure. The boys were puffing by the time they reached the top of the hill. They started to search the rock layers carefully, looking for anything that stood out, that looked different. After half an hour of careful searching, Pieter gave an excited shout. Sam, come here. I think I've found something. Sam dashed over and saw whitish bone embedded in the grey surrounding rock. Amazingly enough, it looked like Pieter had found a complete skull. Buried for millions of years, the rock layers covering the fossil had been weathered away and removed by endless years of baking heat and freezing cold, wind and water. The rocky bed in which the fossil lay was cracked and flaky, and they found they could quite easily chip away at it without damaging the bones. Excitedly they chiselled away, prying off loose flakes of rock until more of the animal was exposed. The skull was smaller than a sheep's head and weirdly flat and rectangular. It had two large round eye holes, behind which were two big bony arches. Two long, sharp-looking canine teeth protruded downwards from its upper jaw in a vampire-like way and locked into the other two which jutted upwards from the lower jaw. The rest of the backward-pointing teeth were much smaller, but very sharp. No doubt that this was a meat-eater, a carnivore, Pieter said. Yes, I wish we could go back in time and see what it looked like, Sam said longingly. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than he felt a violent jolt, and everything went black for a second or two. This was followed by a sickening, whirling sensation, and the blackness slowly filled with tiny specks of light, which though small were so bright that he was forced to close his eyes. He felt of some falling and screamed out. From far away he heard someone else shouting, and then there was a thud and silence. He opened his eyes and glanced around in a terrible panic. He was lying on damp sand on the banks of a small stream. Springing up, he saw that he was no longer on the hill, but on a flat, greenly vegetated plain that stretched as far as he could see, and behind him, where the farm had been a minute before, was a large river. The stream by which he was standing seemed to be running into the river a short way away, and he could hear the softly gurgling sound of water coming from all around him, as if there were many more such streams. The water glittered eerily in the sun, and strange-looking plants and ferns grew in tufts between them. Sam! He heard Pieter shout, and he swung around to see him standing a few yards away. He had a wild, terrified expression on his face. What happened? Where are we? I don't know. What happened? Is this a dream? I might be. Whatever it is, I'm glad you're here too. It feels real, though. My leg is hurting from falling on it. Pieter walked over and stood close to him, his arm touching his for reassurance. How could this have happened? We found the fossil and then, Sam said, desperately trying to remember exactly. Then I said, I wish we could see what it looked like. What could that have done? How could that have brought us here? Pieter was looking intently around. This is a strange place. It can't be the Karoo. Look at all the streams for one thing, and that huge lake over there, see? And some of the plants look like ferns, but most of them look kind of, I don't know, weird. Sam grabbed Pieter's shoulder so hard that he winced. Could we have travelled back in time? The last thing I said was that I wish we could see what the fossil looked like when it was alive. His face was terribly pale. That could be millions of years ago. Yes, Pieter's face had also gone white. I remember reading that the rocks from the Karoo are millions of years old. If we have gone back to the past, it could be hundreds of millions of years ago, whenever the fossil was alive. But how? And it's definitely a meat-eater? Sam asked nervously. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Those teeth wouldn't be any good for leaves, but it looks like it was quite a small animal. Hopefully it eats quite small things like mice. Only there won't be any mice yet if it's millions of years ago. And Pieter stopped, then looking confused, then continued, Anyway, hopefully it's quite far down the food chain. We did food chains at school. Right at the top is what is called the apex predator. That's the biggest, fiercest meat eater, basically. And at the very bottom, you get plants and algae, and then insects eat the plants, and other animals eat the insects, and then bigger animals eat them. It's like a chain, see? Whatever eats something is food for something else. Pieter loved to teach, and for a few happy seconds he forgot his fears in the enjoyment of instructing Sam. Sam, however, was not in the mood. "I don't need a lecture," he said nervously. "Now I feel even worse. Now you've got me thinking about food chains. I wonder where two human boys would fit into this one." "Well," Peter said, trying to be optimistic, "if we are in the past, this world existed before humans were here, so maybe we won't be considered as food." "Well, we don't exactly look like plants," Sam said anxiously. There was a silence as the two boys looked nervously around them and listened hard. It was eerily quiet. The only sound was the trickling of water. "I know why it's so quiet," Peter said suddenly. "It's because there are no birds yet. No birds at all." "I think we should take a walk and try to work out how we got here and how we can get back, and also find a safe place to hide if we see anything dangerous," Sam said. He added wistfully, "And if this is a dream, I really hope I wake up very soon. It's too real." Both boys had been privately thinking to themselves that it must be a dream, albeit a terribly vivid one. It was all just too unbelievable. "I must say, I don't usually notice smells in my dreams," Peter said, "but I'm noticing quite a horrible pong in this one." Sam nodded in agreement. He too had noticed that there was a funny, swampy smell in the air, a bit like old cabbage mixed with something unpleasant. "Let's walk on a bit," Sam said. "I'm starting to feel cold." They'd taken only a few steps when suddenly, from far away, a call broke the silence. It was not a howl or a growl or a bark, but had elements of all of these, and there was something horribly chilling about it. It did not sound like the call of a nice, friendly animal communicating with its friends. It sounded like a hunting cry. The hearts of the boys, apex predators in their own time, but not in this, froze as a primitive fear filled them. They stared at each other in horror. "What was that?" Sam whispered. "Nothing we want to meet," Peter said. "Let's start walking in the opposite direction, fast." Just then there was a loud buzzing noise to their right, and the boys whipped around fearfully. Two massive dragonfly-like insects were flying low over the water. Their bodies were gigantic, much longer than the boys' arms, and were a translucent greeny yellow color. They were fighting or courting as they kept bumping against each other as they flew. To the boys' huge relief, they paid them no attention and flew past fast, disappearing up a water channel. "What the heck?" Sam said in amazement, and he and Peter exchanged a glance mixed with alarm and a little bit of excitement. "If this is a dream, nothing bad can really happen. We'll just wake up," Peter said. "Anyway, I'm just going to think it's a dream, and I'm going to try to enjoy it." "Me too," said Sam, swallowing hard, hoping he would wake up soon. They decided to head towards a hill which stood some way off, hoping to get an idea of the lie of the land and perhaps find a clue as to what had happened. As they approached it, the stream started to disappear, and trees with curious fan-shaped leaves replaced the ferns and tree ferns of earlier. They stopped cautiously every minute to peer around and listen, but the only other living things they saw were more dragonfly-like insects as big as model planes, and, when Peter accidentally kicked a dead log, some huge brown and black bugs. "Yeah, what are those?" Peter yelled, leaping several feet. "Well, they have 6 legs, so some kind of insect," Sam said, peering from a safe distance. "They actually look a lot like cockroaches." He shuddered, freaked out by the huge size of them. "All the insects here look like they're on steroids. I seriously hope we don't meet a scorpion, if they've evolved yet. That'd probably be the size of Phoebe." Walking got more difficult, and they discovered that reaching the top of the hill was complicated by the fact that it was surrounded by small, twisting, maze-like gullies. After a tiring and confusing walk, they exited a gully and found themselves on a sandy plateau with sparsely growing trees. They'd walked only a few paces across it when Peter said sharply, "Sam, did you notice all the holes? We seem to be walking past holes in the ground." The words were barely out of his mouth when there was a strange grunting sound, and a head shot out from an opening a few meters away. It was unlike any creature the children had ever seen. It stared at them unblinkingly with round, black, shiny eyes in a puzzled rather than threatening way. It had a flattish head which extended into a snout from which long, coarse whiskers sprouted. The 2 large nostrils at the end of its snout twitched as it caught their unfamiliar scent. The boys stood frozen in fear as the creature disappeared back into its hole, then popped its head out again almost immediately. It made a loud huffing noise through its mobile nostrils and stared directly at them, assessing the strange trespassers. Then it grunted and growled, and to the boys' alarm, several more heads popped out of holes nearby. "What shall we do? Run?" Sam muttered to Pieter out of the side of his mouth. "I'm not getting bad vibes from them," he whispered back. "Let's just wait and see for a sec." The first animal started to slowly pull itself out of the burrow. Its body was as strange as its head. It was the size of a large cat, with legs that were situated slightly to the side of its body rather than under it. It moved with an odd swaying motion, holding its tail off the ground as it walked. "The body and tail look a little like an otter," Pieter whispered. It appeared to be covered in fine fur, and its feet were large, with claws which looked good for digging. "Don't you see? It's a fossil!" Sam cried suddenly. "Look, you can see the pointy teeth sticking out of its mouth. They're not so obvious as in the fossil because, of course, they're covered by lips and gums." The animal walked a few steps and stopped, looked round at the boys, and then away, as if it had lost interest in them. It snapped suddenly at a big beetle which flew past, then stood chewing, looking relaxed and rather silly. It made the grunting sound again, which seemed to be an all clear to the others, as slowly more and more of the strange creatures came out of their burrows. They all took a good look at the boys, who began to lose their fear completely and to giggle as they saw their round eyes goggling at them anxiously. Eventually, the group seemed to decide that they were harmless and started to amble around, some heading off downhill, while others basked in the sun or sniffed around, digging here and there in the soil. 3 young ones came out of a burrow, followed by what the boys guessed was their mother. They seemed unworried by the boys' presence and began to chase each other in and out of the burrow openings, their mother keeping a close eye. It was somehow enormously reassuring to see such familiar behavior and to see that anxious mothers and playful babies existed wherever and whenever they were. The boys sunk to the ground. Their legs felt weak from all the stress they had been under. It was a relief to sit, and as they watched the group, they became more and more fascinated. They noticed that some of the animals had much larger canine teeth than others. Occasionally, 2 animals would face each other and toss their heads from side to side and then get on with whatever they were doing. "I guess the ones with bigger teeth are males," Pieter said thoughtfully. "In our time, the males of different animals have bigger teeth or horns or tusks to fight other males, or, if they're birds, big crests or tail feathers or bright colors to attract females." "Yes," Sam agreed. "The head shaking is probably some kind of display, although I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to prove." "Maybe they're proving a point that has gone extinct," Pieter joked, and the boys laughed. There was something endearing about the animals and the way they kept communicating with each other once they got used to their strange looks. "We have to work out how to get home," Pieter said after a while. "I want to think I'm going to wake up, but just in case we don't, I think we need a plan. We must think carefully. What did we do before I said I wish we could see the fossil?" Sam put his hands in his pocket and leaned back against a small rock. "I don't—" He stopped. His right hand had brushed against something hard and round in his pocket. In a flash, he remembered the strange stone-like thing he had found. He pulled it out and showed it to Pieter. "I found this stone on my way up the hill. It made me feel, I don't know, funny. Could it have brought us here?" "I don't see how a stone could have such perfectly coloured rings," Pieter said. But then again, he stopped abruptly. The weird, ominous call that they'd heard earlier down on the plain had sounded from somewhere close by. The heads of the surrounding animals shot up, and they all turned to look eastwards, sniffing, swinging their heads. Then, moving as one, they turned and fled towards their burrows. The individuals that had wandered off came sprinting back, and one by one they hurled themselves into the dark round entrances and disappeared. Sam and Pieter sprang to their feet, panicked. The message from the herd was clear: hide. It was the first time the boys had ever been hunted, but fear brought out primitive instinct, and without exchanging a word, they sprinted towards a clump of nearby trees and frantically started to clamber up to adjacent ones. As they launched themselves up the lower branches, they heard with horror a crashing sound in the undergrowth that grew on the east side of the plateau. Whatever it was did not seem to care about stealth. The trees were young and spindly, and a number of branches snapped beneath them as they climbed, frantically trying to get some height. It proved impossible to get very high, and the boys found themselves clinging to the thin trunks, a mere 3 meters off the ground. The call sounded again, and two fearsome beasts appeared abruptly on the far edge of the plateau, stopping to look around in a horribly alert, intelligent way. They were huge, the size of a big bear, and had long snouts from which literally bristled, pointed, fearsome-looking teeth. They looked like all the most terrifying aspects of a crocodile, a bear, and a dog had been combined into one awful animal. Their bodies were muscular and their legs thick and powerful, ending in large, long-clawed feet. They were covered in brown and black stripes, a bit like a zebra, but their hides were strange, and it was impossible to tell if it was fur, scales, or skin which covered them. They came galloping across the plateau in a strange loping motion, then started sniffing in the burrows, scratching and digging at the entrances with their sharp claws. One would hang back and wait, while the other dug around a burrow mouth and stick its head in as far as it could go, hoping to flush one of the small animals out. But there was no sign of their inhabitants, who were no doubt hiding in the very deepest reaches, quivering. Suddenly, one of the beasts raised its head and peered towards the trees where the boys were hiding. It made the blood-chilling call again and started moving with its weird loping gait towards them. "It's seen us!" Peter called out in horror and terror. "I wish we were back on the hill," Sam shouted, seized by a sudden impulse and desperately clutching the strange stone in his pocket. Once again came a violent jolt, blackness, the horrible spinning sensation, the tiny blinding specks of light, and then falling, followed by a hard bump, which made Sam yell out involuntarily again. He opened his eyes. He was lying on the rocks of the hill, his one leg wedged painfully on a thorn bush, but he didn't care. Relief like he had never known filled him, and at the same time he twisted frantically, looking to his left and right to find Peter. He was lying close by, not moving. "Peter, Peter!" Sam shouted, struggling to get to his feet on shaky legs. To his immense relief, Peter raised his head slowly and tried to sit up. He was winded and gasping for breath. Sam reached him and threw an arm round him. "We're home. We did it. We're home." It wasn't a dream. No, it wasn't. I think it's this." And he pulled the strange stone out of his pocket. Its blue, red, and gold colors shimmered mysteriously in the sunlight as the boys stared at it. Sam ran a careful finger over it. "I think it's some sort of wishing stone." "I think you're right," Peter replied, and the boys looked at each other in silence, scared, elated, and awed. They sat silently on the dusty hill recovering. Eventually Sam glanced at his watch, remembering his mother's instruction to be on time for lunch. It was still morning. "The time we spent there didn't pass here," he said thoughtfully. "Do you realize what this means?" Peter asked, his eyes shining like stars. "We can be time travelers. We can surf through time and then come home." Please join us next week for Chapter 3, Jurassic Stowaways.